Good afternoon on today's Angry Bulletin. While most media agencies are talking about the high points and incredible accomplishments that were made in spaceflight in 2023, we really need to remember the low points as well, because a lot of mistakes, miscues, and just bad decisions took place in 2023 that could have a significant impact on the future of spaceflight. And you're going to find out exactly why this channel is called The Angry Astronaut. All of this and more coming at you on The Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to The Angry Astronaut. I hope everyone had a good holiday, a good Christmas, a good Hanukkah for those of you who celebrate that particular holiday. Whatever holiday you may observe at this time of year, I hope all of you enjoyed it. So now we're moving on towards the new year, and of course, lots of media organizations are talking about the biggest events of 2023, and space-related organizations especially are talking about the biggest scientific discoveries of 2023, or the biggest spaceflight accomplishments of 2023, the biggest news stories in general. But when we're talking about spaceflight, the media generally takes a positive view of everything. They talk about achievements and steps forward, that sort of thing, rather than talking about anything bad that may have happened. Well, this is The Angry Astronaut. We do things a little bit differently on this channel. We're not going to be talking about the biggest accomplishments, the biggest strides forward that spaceflight may have taken in 2023. Instead, we're going to talk about the worst incidents, the biggest flubs, the biggest miscalculations and poor decisions on the part of major space agencies that cost millions or perhaps even billions of dollars. And also, in some cases, we're going to talk about spaceflight-related disasters that, although fortunately didn't take the lives of any human beings, definitely proved to be a setback for not only a number of different spaceflight companies, but even the space programs of entire nations. So get ready, guys. The top 10 spaceflight mishaps of 2023 that made me the angriest are coming at you right now. Literally days before the maiden launch of Vulcan Centaur, the Centaur 5 test article in Huntsville undergoing final tests suddenly exploded, throwing ULA's plans into a complete state of chaos. This was very bad news for ULA and for all of their potential customers, because a lot of military contracts depended on Vulcan Centaur entering service at least sometime this year. And when it didn't, a number of these very important and valuable contracts were handed over to SpaceX, dealing yet another blow to the troubled launch provider. It turned out that Vulcan Centaur's payload capabilities were just a little bit too dependent on thin sheet metal, especially in the top part of the Centaur 5 upper stage. The upper stage had to be shipped back to Huntsville, Alabama, modified and retested. Apparently, everything is looking good at this point, and the Centaur 5 upper stage is back in Cape Canaveral as Vulcan Centaur prepares to carry an extremely important payload, the Peregrine lander, and all of the payloads that particular spacecraft is carrying to the moon. ULA has not had time to carry out any sort of testing, any sort of preliminary launch. They have to just go with it, carrying an incredibly important payload in the process. And as you're going to see in just a little bit, doing things that way when you're painted into a corner is not a great idea. But if we really want to talk about a launch provider that's fallen upon hard times in 2023, well, there are very few that are any more pathetic than Astra. I really gotta hand it to these people. They don't give up, but at the same time, given the number of failures that they've had, I really think they need to drop back and punt and perhaps reconsider their business model. Well, as a matter of fact, that's exactly what they did in 2023, even though the military was really depending on Astra's capabilities of delivering small satellites for the military into orbit rapidly. However, their first test launch on July of 2018 failed, November 2018 failed, March of 2020 failed, September 12th, 2020 failed, December 15th, 2020 failed, August 28th of 2021 failed, and then finally, on the 20th of November 2021, carrying a payload for the U.S. Space Force after blowing up another payload in the previous launch, they managed to successfully deliver it to orbit. Problem solved. Time to move forward, right? No. On February 10th, 2022, a mission for NASA failed. And then finally, they bounced back again, March 15th, 2022, with a successful launch for a near space launch out of Portland State University. Good for them. However, NASA decided to give them another shot on June 12th of 2022, and that one failed as well. And since then, Astra has given up on any sort of near-term launches and seemed to be working on other rockets and other possible launch vehicles. Might not be a bad idea given their 80% failure rate up to this point. And speaking of devastating failures, the Japanese Space Agency this year has the unfortunate distinction of grabbing 2 spots on my top 10 list. A lot of very bad things have been happening with JAXA as of late. The less serious incident was the explosion of an Epsilon engine during an important test, an engine for a rocket that's supposed to be carrying a Vietnamese payload in 2024, a mission that is very much in question at this point. However, that's not nearly the worst of the news. As many of you may remember, when the H-3 rocket made its maiden voyage carrying a payload worth over $500 million, that launch failed as well, the second stage engine failing to ignite for some reason, even though the main concern was with the primary booster that had brand new engines. The H-3 rocket, designed to be significant competition for SpaceX and the Falcon Heavy, capable of carrying very substantial payloads for a very low price because of the low cost of its manufacture, well, it turns out that perhaps trying to cut costs has also cut reliability as well. The impact on JAXA has been nothing short of devastating, and it may take some time for the Japanese to recover from this incident. But there are some incidents that companies simply may not recover from at all, especially what recently happened to Firefly. Like Astra, Firefly Aerospace is trying to provide a rapid launch capability to the U.S. military, and like Astra, they are struggling, at least in terms of trying to get a payload successfully delivered to orbit. The first attempt that Firefly made to reach orbit was on September 3rd of 2021. That failed completely, and then on October 1st of 2022, they reached orbit. Kinda. However, the payload didn't get delivered into the proper orbit, the orbit decayed pretty rapidly, and the satellites were lost. After that, Firefly had a completely successful launch on September 15th of 2023, and they launched this mission 27 hours after receiving the order, setting a new national security mission responsive launch record. Very impressive. It seemed that Firefly was heading in the right direction. But then, a few days ago, Firefly tried to repeat their success, and even though they delivered a Lockheed Martin payload up to orbit, It wasn't delivered to the proper orbit, and the orbit began to decay almost immediately. Now, 3 failures out of your first 4 launches is not a bad ratio for an emerging launch provider. Indeed, SpaceX had precisely the same numbers and became the most successful launch provider in human history. But as you're going to see shortly, investors have become a lot less forgiving of failure. And so let's take a bit of an intermission and look at this magnificent footage from the Hubble Space Telescope. And during this time, I would like to thank new Patreon supporters John Harachis, also full name, I believe that's the name he wanted to give, and also Roger Slightum and Nilram. Because of your support and the support of all my Patreon folks and folks who have decided to support my channel in other ways, well, that's how I can keep bringing you content, especially the opportunity to cover these launches in person. If you would like to join these folks before the end of the year, well, all the information is in the description, or you can just watch the video that's linked at the end of this one, because I've picked up another sponsor, Star Trek Fleet Command. And all you have to do is watch the video. You don't have to buy the game, try it, anything like that. Just watch the video about alien space weapons and you will be helping out my channel. Okay, let's move on to number 5. Oh boy, I'm about to really trigger some people here, but let's face it, what happened on April 20th was a debacle. It was a shambles, as I said in the caption, because Starship very well could have exploded under the circumstances that they decided to launch it under. I mean, everybody was talking about how Starship needed a full-fledged deluge system and definitely a flame trench or some sort of mitigation system to protect the launch pad from the force of 33 Raptor engines, double the force of the Saturn V. Surely they should have realized that something was going to happen. And I put all of this on Elon. His impatience is what made all of this occur. Starship was no doubt bombarded with concrete during this maelstrom of concrete shards that happened as a result of this ill-advised launch, and given the fact that SpaceX had a very good deluge system that could have completely protected the launch pad sitting in pieces at Starbase just waiting to be installed, and Elon just couldn't be bothered to wait for it, well, this was irresponsibility at its worst. I'm sorry, but there's no other way to put that. And when it comes right down to it, SpaceX should not have been blaming the FAA for the delay in another launch. I'll tell you something. If I had dumped tons and tons of chemically treated concrete into the Gulf of Mexico, I would have been lucky to just get away with a fine. I might have gone to jail. And yet SpaceX didn't suffer any consequences whatsoever, except a significant delay before launching again, because the FAA was understandably concerned about public safety. But as we all know, SpaceX learned from their mistakes, and launch number 2 went substantially better, although not perfectly, and we can expect a little bit of a delay from the FAA, again to protect public safety before OFT3 occurs, although I'm pretty confident that it's going to happen sometime in February of next year. That's my guess. By the way, if you have a guess to make, please do so, because I have a contest running right now where I'm going to be giving away a piece of Starbase to whoever comes the closest. So please put that in the comments, your guess as to when Starship will fly again. All right, we're moving on to the top 4, and we have to talk about Europe here a couple of times actually, but Ariane 6 has been an ongoing problem, and even though things have been looking kind of optimistic lately with static fires, wet dress rehearsals, etc. looking pretty optimistic, nothing can change the fact that Ariane 6 is an expendable rocket that was outdated before it even came out. I mean, the thing isn't even going to fly until the middle of next year, and by the time it does, it's not going to be competitive at all. And the only way that Arianespace is going to be able to stay in business is if they continue to receive subsidies from the European Union to keep Ariane 6's price tag at an affordable level. That's right, European taxpayers are going to continue to pay a lot of money, in fact more money than they've ever paid before, to keep Arianespace and the Ariane series of rockets afloat. And that is simply unacceptable. Fortunately, Arianespace has finally gotten the message as to what they need to do in order to stay in business. It's been made very clear by the European Space Agency and European governments in general that the free lunch is about to be cut off. But, as I said before, Arianespace is working on reusability not only for the booster for Ariane 6, but also for the orbiter. A new second stage, a reusable second stage that's kind of like a mini Starship called the Suzy, is going to be entering service sometime this decade. And also they're going to be transitioning to reusable liquid boosters as well in order to make the entire Ariane 6 reusable. However, time is very much against Arianespace, and we'll see whether or not they're able to implement these changes in time before Europe runs out of patience. And speaking of running out of patience, I think it's just about time for the US government to run out of patience for SLS, because in spite of all the assurances that we've received that the new plans NASA has for SLS, handing over the program to a private consortium to try to get the price reduced by 50% or perhaps even more, well, that isn't going to work if the primary controlling interest in this consortium is Boeing, the people who screwed this thing up in the first place. And in a couple of reports that were released this year, the NASA Office of Inspector General made it extremely clear that given the budget that NASA is awarded on an annual basis, there is no way that SLS is going to be a sustainable system for getting us to the moon to stay. And since it's obviously going to take some time before Starship can become a complete, turnkey, comprehensive solution for getting human beings to the moon, this puts Artemis in serious jeopardy. It's very possible that the entire program may get shut down before it really even gets started. But if we want to talk about something else that's putting Artemis into a world of hurt, we need to talk about NASA's decisions when it came to HLS. Now, the decision for Starship was not necessarily a bad one. I know I've been critical of it in the past, but nevertheless, I do feel that in the long run, Starship is definitely going to provide the best possible solution for sustaining a permanent presence for the human species, not only on the moon, but also Mars and elsewhere in the solar system. However, in the short run, it's going to be very difficult indeed to get Starship ready for Artemis 3, which is why we needed an HLS backup. And NASA could not have made a worse decision when it comes to a backup. I mean, Blue Moon will probably be a great lander in the distant future, but given the fact that they had to completely redesign it in order to make up for all the terrible engineering decisions that the national team originally made with this lander, well, it's going to take a very substantial period of time before this thing is even remotely ready to put astronauts on the lunar surface. And given the fact that the alternative, the Dynetics Alpaca, had already passed its preliminary design review back in 2020, that was clearly the alternative that could get us to the moon quickly in case we ran into problems with Starship. Instead, NASA has opted for an even more complicated solution coming from a company that has never put anything into orbit at all. It's obvious as to why this decision was made. The fact that Jeff Bezos and all of his legal team and all of his billions were going to come after NASA if they didn't allow him to put his name and his legacy and his stamp on the Artemis program in the future. But this may have sabotaged our plans for going back to the moon for good. Well, hey, at least China looks like they have a pretty good plan. And now we have to come to the number one spot. What could possibly occupy the #1 disaster for 2023? Well, this may surprise some of you. It's Virgin Orbit and Spaceport Cornwall, because this was the only disaster of 2023 that led to the complete demise of a launch provider, and hundreds of talented people, very good people that I got to know quite well while I was at Cornwall, losing their jobs, and for no good reason. If we want to talk about all the other companies that have experienced hiccups and problems during their development, whether it be Astra or Firefly, well, Virgin Orbit had 4 successes and 2 failures, a 66% success rate in their first 6 launches. SpaceX didn't do that. But at the time of the Spaceport Cornwall launch, Virgin Orbit's financial situation was very shaky indeed, and after the anomaly, no investor was willing to take a risk on the company whatsoever, even though their success rate was substantially better than most emerging launch providers. The most annoying reaction, as far as I'm concerned, came from George Freeman, Minister for Science, Innovation and Technology at the UK government, when he was asked as to whether or not Britain would be interested in getting a sovereign launch provider for maybe $20 million. He had the following to say, quote, "As Minister for the Space Industry here, we stand ready to support a specific proposal that looks sustainable, but we're not looking or in the business of making a major UK investment in acquiring a platform that hasn't worked." If 4 successes out of 6 attempts is his definition of a launch provider that doesn't work, I think he's going to be disappointed with every launch provider that tries to launch out of Britain, because you never get a success rate any better than that. And yet, that apparently is what he expects. And as a result, every other government on the planet that had an interest in Virgin Orbit, whether it be Japan, Australia, all of them passed. And then competitor Stratolaunch decided that the platform that doesn't work might actually work for them, and all they did is put a new livery on the damn thing, and it has all of the same call signs, the same IDs as a 747. Nothing has really changed about Cosmic Girl except for the payloads that it's going to be carrying. Some of Stratolaunch's new hypersonic test articles, apparently they think that this is going to be a good risk, and they took advantage of the fact that they could gobble up a competitor when it was worth almost nothing to any other investor. And by the way, Rocket Lab did the same thing with Virgin Orbit's production facilities, getting that for a song, and they've been putting that to very good use as well. It's one of the most extreme examples of a lack of vision that I can think of, at least that took place in 2023. So what's going to happen in 2024? Well, if everything goes to plan, Starship will make it to orbit, Vulcan Centaur will make it to the moon, and Artemis 2 will put humans in lunar orbit for the first time in over half a century. But I can guarantee you there will be plenty of developments that will keep me very angry for a long time to come. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, please check the description for various ways to support this content, and don't forget to watch the video linked at the end of this one. And as always, guys, stay angry about space.